Welcome. This is part one of three of building a wood tool chest. You can buy these tool chests, I know, at the store, at the home centers, and they're just a little bit too expensive for my budget. And I usually have a lot of wood laying around from wood projects, so I thought I'd try and build my own. So here's how I did that. Um, Here I am just ripping some of the wood that will be the face frame and the recessed panel sides. And this is all red oak. I have an indoor shop, so I like to cut down on dust as much as possible. So I ripped these down on the bandsaw and then just use I have this one of my favorite antique planes that I use to joint the edges. Works pretty well. I use a guide on the bandsaw and a couple of passes with this and check it a few times, and usually works out pretty well. Plus it hones your skills a little bit to be able to do this. It takes a while sometimes to get it right, but here I'm just checking to make sure it's nice and flat, and then I'll also check the square to make sure that it's going to fit together with the other pieces when I build the case. If it's off a little bit, just a few more passes. You'll notice on the hand plane there I had to replace that front knob that was broken off when I bought this. I'm guessing this thing was probably made about 100 years ago, maybe 120. But boy, the blade on here is just amazing. It has one of those laminated blades where you can see there were two different types of steel laminated together under heat. So the bottom edge, which is the sharp cutting edge, is half the blade, and that's made out of a real high carbon steel, so it holds an edge. And then the top is probably a more durable steel, less carbon, that gives it that strength and durability. Notice when I hold this, I hold it just at a little bit of an angle. That tends to let you slice through the wood and gives you a little bit of a cleaner cut. Also makes it a little bit less difficult to push through there too. Just make sure you have a nice flat surface, and if you need to take it down every now and then, just keep working with it and be patient. It'll come. I hone my skills every day. They're far from perfect, but I can usually get what I want out of these pieces. Some of you may have really, really awesome jointers too, and that's great. Those work well. Here I'm doing a little bit of a longer piece, so I'm going to use these kind of notches I set up on my workbench. My workbench too, nothing fancy. I made this out of just kind of scrap pieces of wood that I had. It's worked really well. I've had this for, I don't know, 10 years or so, and very durable. You can see the top is made out of some leftover birch I have, and a little bit of oak up there too. I have the depth of this plane set, so it'll just take a thin little shaving off. And so a couple of passes usually helps. You can see sometimes one end will get a little bit higher than the other, and see how the ruler wiggles there. So you just take a little bit off the end, and that usually fixes it. Just watch your thickness. Sometimes when I cut, I will leave the line on there when I cut or when I rip it on the bandsaw, and you can work to that. And then after you do it a little bit, it won't wiggle or bow or bend. We'll make sure we check the square of that face. This setup works pretty well for planing these long boards. If I have a real thick board, you might see down on the front side of the workbench, I have holes down there for the holdfasts to hold the board up. Just a reminder, if you see the grain, plane along with the grain so it doesn't chip out. So here I'm using my combination saw. This is a trusty, very, very durable Delta miter saw that I bought. Oh boy, I must have bought this 22 years ago. It still cuts like it did the first day. Delta made some really good tools back in the kind of 90s, mid to late 90s. They're okay now, but probably not as good. So I'm just cutting these to length. You can do this by hand. Sometimes I'll do this by hand. I had a lot to do here, so I just wanted to show how I did it on the miter saw. I still have the same blade in there too that I had 22 years ago that came with this. Every year or two I send it out to be sharpened, ground down professionally. I notice that if I work outside and I do like a fence project or a swing project where I use kind of a high resin wood like the treated lumber, which is pine or fir, it gets a lot of pitch buildup on there, so I have to have it sharpened more often. So here what I'm showing is how I put together, this would be the side panels, which would be the recessed panel side panels, and I'm not a big fan of pocket screws. I prefer to use this method. A couple different reasons, I guess. I think it holds a little bit better. The screw doesn't go in quite at an angle, and the other thing is, aesthetically, I really like how the screw plugs that I cut out of oak, I'll show you that in a little bit, I like how those look in the wood. They give it a look of a little more of a craftsman look, where you can see where the screws have gone in. I have at sometimes made the screw plugs out of a different type of wood to really let them stand out. I made a stool one time and made it out of cherry. So you have this really dark orangey red cherry wood. And then I made the screw plugs out of a really white hard maple. So it gives it kind of a cool look. I like all my handmade woodworking projects to look like a hand actually touched them, so I'm okay with that. So here I'm just lining up where the screws would go in so I can drill. I will use a 3/8 inch Forstner bit. You can see that up there to the right, laying on the workbench. That will cut a nice clean cylinder into there where your screw will go and hold everything together, and then your screw plug will glue into that afterward. So here are the Forstner bits in the drill press. All I'm going to do is set the depth. So I usually go down about 1/2 inch or so. You see the black part there on the Forstner bit. If you go down about that far, that's pretty close to where it will be. I do make sure I keep my bits nice and sharp. This Forstner bit I just sharpened before this larger project that I'm showing you right now. I'll just run a little diamond file over it to make sure the edges are nice and sharp. It makes a big difference in effort and stuff when you're drilling all these holes to keep them sharp. So you'll watch, I'll set the depth stop on the drill press. This is a basic 10-inch drill press I got from Sears before they went out of business many years ago. It's a Craftsman model. Works great. For all the projects I need, works just great. Only cost about $120 at the time, so good value. Same with the bandsaw. The bandsaw is a Craftsman too. That costs like $140 or $50. It's a 10-inch bandsaw. Works really well for what I need them for. So here you can see where the sharpness of the bit kind of pays off, goes in there and makes a really nice clean hole, and that's where our screw plugs will go. The nice thing about a Forstner bit, if you're not familiar with them, is when it cuts a hole, it leaves the bottom perfectly flat, except for that one little point in there. So that works well to hold the screw. You'll see it here when I tip it up, but it cuts a nice cylinder out of there. Really clean too, out of that hard red oak. So here, because it's a long screw going in here, I have to use a pretty long drill bit. The drill bit's 1/8 inch. I'm using number 8 construction screws here. They have the lobe design, or what we used to call the T head. They might still call them that, but I see them called lobe design. 5 lobes on there, 6 lobes. But anyway, the drill bit that I choose, which is 1/8 inch, is about maybe 80–90% of the thickness of the threads in your screw. So for hardwood, I would do that. I always drill a hole that's about 80–90% diameter to your screw threads. In softwood, if you have a pine or a cedar, it's okay to go like drill a hole that's maybe 60% the diameter of the screw threads. So here, just checking the side panels for square, and they worked up just fine. You really have to have your cross cuts perfect on those to get everything to line up. So a little bit of a due diligence before works well. So here, just using the holdfasts. I love these holdfasts. They're a lot faster to do things. Probably hence the name, right? So I have a little block of cedar that I keep. That's a pretty soft wood, so it'll protect most woods. And I'm just using a Japanese pole saw here to make quick work of this 1/4-inch plywood. This is oak surfaced on one side, oak veneered, and cuts right through there, gives you a nice straight clean cut. Notice I have the good side facing down, so when I pull up on the cut, the good side has the cleanest cut. Rotate it around here and we'll cut the length. You see in the background there I have about a 40-inch tall by maybe 30-inch wide tool chest that I built. This is a smaller one we're building now. That other one's pretty big, but it has kind of the scooped out handles and the drawers. Holds my tools really well. That's a really nice one made out of oak. That's 10 drawers. That holds a ton of material and sandpaper, scrapers, pliers, whatever. Alright, so here we're finishing up the face frame, just putting together everything. So I lined everything up, made sure the top was nice and flush, and then used those flat bar clamps to hold everything together while I drill these and screw them. One of these pieces of oak was really hard. You'll see when I pull the drill out, it's just smoking because there's so much friction in there. It drilled just fine, and the drill was plenty sharp. It just was a lot of friction. You see there's a chunk of beeswax on there I got from a local bee, I guess, keeper. They sell this stuff for making candles and stuff, but I'll put that beeswax on my screws when I go in if the wood is really, really hard. You don't always have to do it, but it does help them drive in. You see me adjusting the clutch there on the driver. It's way up, I think around 14 or 15 there. This wood is so hard sometimes I have to just set it on the drill mode and just be careful to let up on the trigger when you get in or it won't go in. Putting a pretty long screw in there, about some of those are 3-inch screws. So here I have in the recessed panel, the piece of plywood goes on the inside. Sometimes I'll do a floating panel that's real wood. Here I just chose, because I was kind of using recycled pieces for this, to use up some of the plywood that I made. And that's it for part 1. Part 2, we'll keep working on the cabinet case, and we'll go from there. I'll see you in part 2. Thank you.